The following is a production of Salt and Light Radio in Boise, Idaho. Kick off your work boots and pull up a boulder. It's time for Man Cave, discussing the issues that affect Catholic men in today's culture. Grab your favorite beverage, pick out a comfy spot around the campfire, and enjoy today's conversation with our two favorite cavemen, Pat King and Brian Howe.
But he has really, in my opinion, and not to sugarcoat it with him, I've known him for quite a while, and so, but as I've seen it in my daily life, it's really cleaned up the whole image of our justice system in Canyon County.
We have done our best.
It's made a huge difference.
I have amazing partners in the criminal justice system, from law enforcement to even the public defender's office. We work really closely together to make sure we're all doing what is the right thing to do for the citizens of Canyon County.
So, in my opinion, I think it's almost should be a prerequisite if you're going to be the head of a legal process, that you should have a deep faith. Yeah. Because I don't think you can be a good judge of situations if you're not looking to someone else for guidance. Yep. Because I you can see, and again, we'll get into this in our other episode about his job, but I think you can see throughout the nation where prosecutors have taken their own steps and become their own legal advisor and determiner of what laws they should follow and what not.
That's exactly right.
And it's caused a lot of angst and chaos among larger cities that fortunately Idaho is a state that people want to come to, which we're full. Don't come anymore. Yeah. You know? But like you keep saying, Idaho is Idaho, and that persona is what gives us the life that we can live. We can be productive for our families and have a family life without fear of just the turmoil that comes about when there's chaos.
Yes.
So that I am very grateful for. And
thank you.
And you understand, if you look back in the history of Canyon County prosecutor, it was an ugly sight, and it was unnecessary, but because he fought it. I mean, he was caught red-handed and fought it, and it made it even worse. But it's good to see that we are in good hands now.
Oh, thank you very much, Pat. So
I thank God for making things tough on you.
God doesn't throw anything that
you can't
handle.
So now you're married. Mm-hmm. When's your first kid come? I know you're father of two.
Yeah. So our first child is born 4 years after we're married.
You do like to really discern things.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are merely there as vessels for God. And so whenever God decided to place a child in our life, he did. And it's so our first child, Lucy, was born in 2014. So I always intersperse I always time everything to my academics. So as I indicated,
when you start.
Well, like I said, as my PhD was completed when I took over the office. So it's like God says, okay, now you're done with school. Now you focus on this. So my daughter then I'm almost done. I'm just finishing up my master's in theology. So I had free time, Pat. At the time, I didn't have kids. My wife was very patient with me and knows my. I guess if one was to say there's an addiction, my addiction is school. So
yeah, I know.
So I was working on my master's in theology, once again trying to formalize.
Now how did that come? What was your drive to do master's in theology?
Yeah, so it is. I am an individual that needs structure, and it's the way in which my brain is wired. Is if you were to give me a couple books and say, Brian, these books are awesome to read and you need to read them
for pleasure,
and they could be, amazing. It could be Benedict's treatise on Jesus. it'll sit next to my bedstand because I have so many other projects. Like you were just saying, it's very tough to get onto my schedule. It's just because it just keeps getting built. If I don't have somebody,
prosecuting job's a cushy job. I mean, it's just it's just all image, right?
Yeah. If I don't have somebody telling me that I have to have this done by this time, and there's accountability to it, then it just keeps getting pushed off. So that's why I wanted to learn more about my faith. That's why you scheduled
me. I told you had to come in.
That's exactly right. But so the whole purpose of the theology degree is I wanted to do a deep dive into the faith, but I wanted it to be a deep dive that was structured of those theologians and experts that could truly guide me through the process. And so I engage, and it was, if anyone has the opportunity, I went to school at Christendom College. So it's out of Virginia, the Notre Dame Graduate School of Christendom.
Was that online or in?
It was online. Okay. And it was a phenomenal master's program, and I would encourage anyone to do it. Very orthodox, very true to the faith in the aspect. And I learned so much about my Catholic faith because now the discernment is, now I can't be a priest unless I switch rites. But the bishop won't let me switch a rite. So maybe there's a diaconate somewhere down the road. So this is what's going on in my brain at the time. And so I do that program, and at the time that program is finishing up, my daughter comes into our life and is absolutely a blessing that I mean, you can't explain it.
Yeah. It's hard to explain, but my first child was born. It was a daughter, and just had me wrapped around little finger all the time.
The one thing I would tell guys out there and their lovely spouses, if you haven't done it, don't find out the sex of your child. Because we did not. Yeah, and it is like the last surprise that you can get. So we had no clue if it was going to be a boy or a girl, and it was a little girl, and blessing beyond blessings.
Yeah. So you're finishing up now. Yep. Did you go back to school again, or did you decide that the second child was it?
Well, the second child, yes, I was not. I had 1 year left after my daughter was. Okay. And then that program had finished, and then we found the blessing that we had a second child on the way. This was a couple years later.
Okay, and now you're just so his second child is similar to mine. We have a similar story.
Yep.
But did you know through ultrasound that you were going to have issues with your son?
Yeah,
like I did?
At the first major ultrasound that we had, the doc came in and told us that our son had what was referred to as...
And he knew it was a son. He knew the son.
Well, he didn't tell us the sex at that stage, is because we were trying to do the same thing, but...
Eventually you found out.
Yeah. So he advised us that our son had what was called a congenital diaphragmatic hernia.
He could see that in the ultrasound.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So basically what that is you have this diaphragm that basically keeps the lungs up here, all the other organs down below. And so basically he was missing 80% of that diaphragm.
Well, see, now, this was what year?
This was... Well, he was born in 2016, so we found out in about January-ish of...
So, and ultrasound technology, and I really, it's really grown. When our son was born, it wasn't as good, but it still had ultrasound. And we could see in our first really investigatory ultrasound that our son was going to have problems, but they really couldn't determine exactly what it was. They just saw some irregularities and said there's, of course, in California, they advised us to abort our son.
Yep.
So this is, 20 years, 25 years later that you're.
One of our the physician basically, I'll get to the rest of the story, but one of the physicians said if your son was born 20 years earlier, based on medical technology, he wouldn't have survived. He wouldn't have survived.
Wow. And I know he's still around. He's a very active child.
No, too active, Pat.
Yes, he's like a pinball.
So yeah, so I mean, this is a shock, right? You're processing it. So now you have to start seeing all these specialists. And forgive me, I don't know all the doctor names and titles, but we went to a doctor that was a specialist in.
Gastrointestinal.
No, that comes later.
Oh.
It's like neonatal. It's the doctor specializes of the fetus in the womb.
Yeah.
That's all they do is once the child is born, then they don't have any other part.
Right. Okay.
So my wife and my mother-in-law.
Things have changed.
Yes, my wife and my mother-in-law, they go to see this doctor. I'm in court at the time. So I'm in a courtroom, so it's a very vivid day at that stage. Is I get a call from my mother-in-law, and I just happened to be at a recess, so break in the court process. And she says, "You need to get over in Boise right now and drop what you need to do." I said,
and now
okay.
your wife's still pregnant.
My wife's still pregnant. She's at the doctor with my mother-in-law at this stage.
So now you're really going to find out.
Okay, so what's going on here? So I head over there, and we the first thing that comes out from my wife and my mother-in-law says, this doctor says 90% of women would abort this child. And you need to be part of this discussion. And so me being me, it was just going, well, doc, that's not an option at this stage, is we're going to go through the process. So this one is off.
That's pretty much the same process we went through.
And in hindsight, you start thinking about it of, you ask me about my economic status. You ask me about my ethnicity. You ask me about all these other demographics. Never once is there a checkbox of what is your faith and religion.
Nope.
And it strikes me as maybe that should start being, because maybe you would approach us differently knowing that. But that was the first suggestion that comes from the doctor. It's not even, I get the aspect and from a medical profession and from a lawyer, there's all these liabilities. You have to put every possible option on the table. But when this is what first comes out of the mouth of the doctor of going, this is probably the medical recommendation. No. Yeah. Why are we doing that? So
you know what the first consultation once was, well, you wouldn't want to be a burden to the state of California, would you? And the guilt and the fear of us causing harm to someone else. Boy, they lay it on thick, but they never once asked us what our Christian value, if we had Christian values.
So it would be nice if they would change the intake process to include that.
I agree.
So let's just say that was not a very pleasant experience, and
probably very traumatic for your wife.
Which is why I got called to drive as fast as I could from Caldwell to the big city of Boise. So then we decided we were switching providers. I'm trying to keep names out since I know this is publicly aired. My hope is when my son turns 10 that we will take my son to this doctor and say, this is just for that experience.
I wished I'd taken both my kids, because our first two were told because of testing they should be aborted. And I'd love to go back and say, hey,
So we ultimately met up with a physician, Dr. Kernow, lifesaver.
Oh, yeah, he was our doctor up here, too. Very
absolutely good. Amazing physician.
Yeah.
And he embraced us in our family.
He did.
And walked us through very much a Christian man, and walked us through this long process. So we, at that time, we identified that it was a boy because he wanted us to start bonding with this child. So we went through the process. He explained exactly how everything was going to happen, and it happened to the T as he predicted, and everything to that effect. So when our son was born, very similar to your story, he made his first sort of cry, put up to my wife's head, and about 5 seconds later, boom, he was intubated.
Yeah.
He yanked up to the NICU, where he spent the next 3.5 months. at the NICU and
Now,
underwent about 4 major life surgeries.
And the surgery was done right away.
The surgery was done on day 10.
Day 10.
So that was the medical best practices at the time. He was intubated, so there was oxygen going to the brain, so everything else was
How
good.
did they keep everything else stabilized?
He was in a intubated
in an incubator,
yep,
but did he have compression things on him?
Yep. He had everything.
See, that's
that
why you're right. He
medical advancements is they wouldn't have picked up the congenital diaphragmatic hernia in the ultrasound.
No, not
20
at
years
all,
ago.
not then.
And we would never have known when he was born.
See, that's
that
why
he had it.
with our son, they couldn't detect the hole in his heart.
Yep.
That was huge because they didn't have the specialized infrared
Yep.
where it showed colors.
Yep.
And you could, when we did at 2.5 months, when we did an ultrasound on our son's heart, they could actually see the hole in his heart and the unsewn flap that was flopping about because of the blood flows that you could see. And if they had that, even just 2.5 months earlier, his open heart surgery would have done at birth, and more than likely he would still be alive today.
Yep. That's exactly right. So it's medical advancements is mind-boggling.
Yeah,
so, but I mean, Dr. Kernow saved our child's life. Is you're spending 3.5 months hanging out at the hospital bedside, right?
I know all about that.
I really dialed into Thomas à Kempis's The Imitation of Christ during this time. And that was my devotional, and it was very difficult, especially for the first, I think it was about 1.5 to 2 months. We weren't even able to really touch our son, right? Because he's in the incubator, and I mean, it's really, that aspect's tough. You can look. Yep. So, once again, really starts developing one's faith,
So
solidifying the faith.
Did you suffer any angst and doubts or questions? I mean, did you go back and forth, or were you? Me, it was a challenge. I'll be honest.
With God?
With God.
No,
It was a
that
challenge with
aspect
me.
was not. There was angst of, is he going to survive or not? But from a faith aspect, no, I think it just solidified our faith.
My faith greatly waned. That's partly why I do these podcasts, because I struggle with my misunderstanding of, now I'm not a practicing Catholic at this time, a non-denominational Christian, and I'm questioning my punishment with this child. You know, I think he's a burden, and I think God's punishing me, kind of like David. Not that I was even that great king, but, you know, that I looked at it like I did something wrong, and now my son's being punished for my sins. And it took me a while. It took me a couple years, actually. But so I'm glad that your faith was stronger than mine waned.
I mean, it's God guiding us, right? I think there's a lot of...
Well, God still had a hand in everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just questioned it. It was me that struggled.
Yeah, I think it is, the aspect is, my wife is strong in the faith. I'm strong in the faith. Our families, her parents, my mom, we're all... I mean, I would be remiss to say that there's not questions of why, but it had nothing to do with God's doing this to punish, if that makes sense.
This is St. Luke's downtown Boise, right?
No, this is St. Al's.
St. Al's, okay.
Yeah, St. Al's. Yeah, so.
And we were in St. Luke's.
Yeah, so Dr. Kernow had moved to St. Al's.
Yeah,
So.
So our son was born in California, but in 95 we moved back home. We had more family support because we knew he was going to need more time in the hospital, and we needed someone that was there for the rest of our family when we had to spend time in the hospital. And Dr. Kernow was who we ended up getting just happenstance, I think, referred to, and he was phenomenal for us. And
So
that's great that you got tied in with him.
Yeah, he's amazing. And so that was, it solidified the faith. It the best thing about it too is, I mean, other than my son, is it put life in perspective too, Pat. It's what is important in life.
Absolutely.
And it there's so many things that are superfluous that right. It's why are we complaining about it?
Yeah, the little things that you spent time pondering and fretting over just didn't seem to,
weren't important anymore.
Well, I lost a $2 million property, and yet that was nowhere near as tragic as the loss of my son.
Absolutely.
And people, one of the things I was actually written about in a book, Deacon Patrick Kearns wrote about me. We went to a men's retreat and my teardrop camper caught on fire. We all get together, we put it out. I pull all my stuff out so it dry, and we go back to our men's retreat part of the camping trip, and he looked over at Deacon Kearns, looked over at me and said, "You handled that really well." And I said, "Well, when you've lost the love of your life, a child, this is nothing. I mean, it's
exactly
just
right.
something that happens. You know,
exactly right.
you got to move on, man." And so you're right. It does put everything in perspective. The details don't matter quite as much, and the joy of life is
exactly
far more
right.
important.
It's exactly right. So no, that's he. And as you've seen him at Mass now, it's you wouldn't even know that he went through all of this because he's nonstop.
Well, he suffered some eardrum issues, and I know that was quite painful. My son went through the same thing where they had to put those little corkscrew things in the eardrum for drainage and all that. My son went through that same thing, but when he was feeling good, you could tell when he was a little bit cranky, not feeling well, and I recognize those signs. I had a lot of compassion for you guys because I know when you're in church and he's cranky, it's like you want to do both by both, make sure everyone's happy around you, but
that's why no one sits around us at the. I thought it was.
Well, it's this bubble.
The bubble.
But when he was happy, when he was healthy, when you and I think it's your in-laws, and it's like, it's like a hot potato.
Yep. That's exactly right. Yep.
And then you had this friend that even cared for him. He ended up spending a lot of time with her.
Yep.
And it was just funny to see that he would go just talk to everybody.
Yep.
My son did the same thing.
Yep.
Would look at everybody, engage with everybody, and just fascinating to see. It's like what they say: if there's no crying in the pews, the church is dying.
Yep, that's exactly right.
And it's a welcome sign.
Yes, very much so.
So now your son's health issues are kind of under control at this point.
Very much so. Yeah. So he
he's
still has some feeding issues, but other than that, he's doing good.
Going to school.
Yep, he's in first grade.
Okay. And things are great. And
And
is he growing? Is he gaining weight and size?
He's growing, not at the rates in which us and the GI doc would like him to. But
he's how old?
He is 6 years old now. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when Lance was 12, he stopped growing at about the age 6. He really pretty much stayed the same length and weight. I think he died at 40 pounds.
Yep.
Which he should have been at 12. He should have been much heavier, much taller. But that's the one thing about all these these early childhood things that really delays their growth. But I don't see him around. You go to the evening mass on Saturday more than the Sunday morning mass. I come for the donut. No, I lead a rosary. The Knights lead a rosary before mass, and then there's donuts after, so it's a twofer. Yeah, it's a twofer for me. Yeah, but
the month of the Holy Rosary right now.
Yes. So we're coming to the end of your journey life. So now you are you were asked to do something.
Yeah, so I was to after
further your education.
Yep. So after my son was born, it took us. The first year was brutal.
Yeah,
really brutal, and it's a
strain too.
It is very much so. I mean, it's a blessing yet a strain, and you and I were having this off the air. It's looking back on it. How did I do it?
Yeah,
and it's but we got through it, and life is golden, and I can't complain other than my son just fell off the monkey bars and got a buckle fracture, and it's but boys are going to be boys.
He's all boy.
He is all boy. That's what everyone keeps saying. I always tell my mom I was like a little pious angel, and I think she would disagree with it, but
we all want to think the best of ourselves.
So no, the bishop. So after about 2 years into my son's life, the bishop had asked me to pursue a canon law degree so I could assist the the diocese with canonical aspects, having the civil law degree, and then going for that. So I did that. That took me a 4-year process through St. Paul University in Ottawa, and it was a fascinating experience and very eye-opening. So
that was online as well, or did you have to go on campus?
So it was primarily online, and then you have to go to Ottawa for a 2 to 3 week period of time once a year.
Yeah, okay. I remember you traveling for that.
Yeah,
yes.
but I only had to do that one time because then the pandemic hit.
Oh.
And so they weren't allowing any foreign students to come into the country for the
Are they still allowing
for the
foreign
middle
students?
for the middle 2 years of the program, and then the third year there was still, I mean, it's a very international school, so there were some countries that they weren't allowing, and they just decided we're just going to be equal and equitable to every country, and everything was going to be distance.
And they mailed you your certificate.
Yeah. Well, I'm still waiting for the official piece of paper.
Okay.
So I got the confirmation that I passed my comprehensive exams, all my classes, my paper.
Well, then
did
did that then lead to being asked to be the chancellor of the diocese?
Yeah. So our previous chancellor had, and God rest his soul, he just passed away.
Yes, he did.
So he was instrumental in pushing me to this as well. He was a guiding force for the 4 years I was doing the canon law program, and a huge loss to the diocese. But he retired. He had just getting retired since he knew I was being done, sort of passing the baton. And so I'm doing both jobs right now. So I'm still the elected prosecutor, doing the chancellor, sort of part-time, doing the diocese.
Will that transition into a full-time role eventually?
Wherever God, and then AKA wherever the bishop decides to put me to. So
by the time these episodes air, it would have been a couple 3 weeks from he came in earlier this morning on October 5th to do our live episode, and we talked about these similar things. And one of the things we talked about was the difference. You had a master's in theology, but then you study canon law. And I asked him, I said, did you find that, because he had to study all these encyclicals in the past, and you went really back into history. And one of the comments I made was that did you find the church to be consistent, reverent, and still the more I guess the word I'm trying to say is more known to be the true church of Christ, and did history is consistent, and they keep all these records, and your comments were very rewarding, because it was interesting to hear that it was more defined.
Absolutely. I mean, it's when you really start diving into the teachings of the church. So when we're talking about these encyclicals, previous other papal documents, promulgations, decrees, the church's doctrine has never changed in the course of over 2,000 years since the teachings of Christ. And to me, it is just absolutely remarkable. And there's hundreds, thousands of these documents. And you know that there's people out there that dive into this, but the consistency of it all is
I have
rewarding.
nowhere near your education at all. I've only read the Bible one time through, and that was with the aid of Father Mike's Ascension Bible in a year.
Yeah.
And I read along with it,
Father
and
Mike
it was
Schmidt's awesome.
Yeah, Father Mike Schmidt was a great. If you haven't done that podcast, take that journey. It's worth every minute you spend in the Bible. It helped me really, because then his analyzation of the scripture readings that day were also very right on. But one of the things that I found when I left the church, I thought the church was changing because of Vatican II and some priests. And as you all know, it's we follow Jesus, not a priest.
Yep.
So when a priest goes awry and we follow that priest down that path, we've fallen the wrong person.
Yep.
You know, Judas left Jesus too. And so one of the things that convinced me that I was back in the true church, the Church of Christ, was when I came back and I went to my first Mass in Our Lady of the Valley in Caldwell, I found that the church was consistently what I grew up with. Yep. And in a 30-year absence, it hadn't changed. Nope. And some people think, oh, that's wrong. It should change. No. What you want is the church Christ taught.
Yep.
So, and I'll have an episode on that eventually down the road. Christ taught in those 3 years exactly what we teach today.
Yep.
And that was actually the thing that made me feel that, one, I was going down the wrong path, and two, I needed to come back to the truth of the church. And you only confirm that by your studies in the deep, rich history. And we keep records of everything.
Yes, we
I
do.
mean, hard copies, digital, no, it's all hard copy. Even today, it's all hard copy.
That it is.
And so with that, I would like to thank Bryan for his testimony today, his journey through his faith. In some ways, we're very similar with our families. In other ways, I went down a path of wanderlust because I was lost. So a wanderlost. You went down a wanderlust for experience and it deepened your faith. So this is why it's important, I believe, that we, everybody share their testimony, write it down, because your kids really don't know your journey. If you're not teaching it to them, they don't know what you went through. So you need to write it down so that your kids at least have a history of your faith walk, so they can look back and say, well, yeah, my dad struggled, or my dad did this, or my dad did that, and now I have something to go off of why he's so strongly committed. So men, if you have a chance, just start taking notes. It's good therapy. I learned by writing about my time with my son at his bedside for 31 out of 34 days, that in writing that, I realized how I had the endurance and the strength to do that. And that was because even though I was angry with God, God wasn't angry with me. He was the one lifting me up and keeping me fed, keeping me nourished and strengthened by my resolve to the duty of being there for my son. And God is there for you all the time. So with that, thank you, Bryan.
Thank you, Pat,
for coming,
for having me.
And we will end with the St. Michael prayer, as we always do. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you.
Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Man Cave, a weekly podcast discussing the issues that affect Catholic men in today's culture. A production of Salt and Light Radio in Boise, Idaho. To learn more about our ministry, please visit our website, saltandlightradio.com.